Hey everybody, welcome to our video on food chains and food webs. We're going to get into some pretty cool ecology and biology here about how energy is flowing. Okay, now you might be thinking to yourself, like, food chains, food webs, I learned about that stuff in elementary school, middle school. Why should I care in high school? Like, how does a little picture of animals eating animals or plants really going to impact ecology? What does that have to do with the wolves of Yellowstone? Well, we're going to get into that. So, the two things we're going to look at today are, one, how does energy flow through an ecosystem, nice and simply. Two, when an organism is removed from an ecosystem, what happens? Because there's cascading effects, it's called. So on the left we have a simple food chain, and on the right we have a food web. You've seen these before. So really quickly, food chain, it travels one path. All right, sun goes to the grass, grass gets eaten by the grasshopper, grasshopper gets eaten by the mouse, mouse eats snake, blah blah, all the way through. We have decomposers here that break down dead organisms, and that goes back to the grass. Something we're going to get into more a little bit later. But that's a simple food chain. Things with food chains is it follows one path. It's a simple breakdown of what happens. It's not really real life, though. All right, snakes don't just eat mice; they eat a whole lot of other things. Eagles don't just eat snakes. Okay, if you look on the right, we have a food web of the savanna. It's the best one I could really find that has good quality. If we take a look here, a food web is broken up into numerous food chains. So if I follow one right now, I start with some grass down here, eaten by the grasshopper, eaten by the baboon, who gets eaten by the jaguar. Okay, that is one food chain in this whole food web. Now, a grasshopper could also be eaten by a bird. So it's a little bit more real life. Okay, so a food web is more real life. It's just more complicated. Okay, so the big thing we're talking about with this is the 10% rule, which is down here. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why is this underlined, starred, and now circled? Because it's super important. Okay, pretty much this is the idea. Whenever something eats another thing, whether it's the grasshopper eating a grass or me eating a cheeseburger or something like that, okay, only 10% of the energy in that organism being eaten moves up the food chain. So what I mean by that is, if we look up here, where I just erased everything, the sun goes into the plants. Okay, the plants get eaten by the grasshopper. Only 10% of the energy of the grass goes into the grasshopper. So the 10% rule is saying that only 10% of energy is transferred. Okay, so you might be thinking, like, well, where does the other 90% go? Well, if I eat something, that energy is going to go towards growth, towards me moving, things like that. I'm going to use that energy. So when a grasshopper eats a blade of grass, it's only getting 10% of the energy the grass got from the sun. Okay, so that causes a big deal. So if we zoom in over here, let's look at this. So let's say the grass here has 100 calories, 100 C, actually CAL. Yeah, 100 calories. Now, I'm simplifying this very easily, okay? So if the grasshopper eats the grass, that means only 10 calories goes into the grasshopper. Then the baboon eats the grasshopper. Well, 10% of 10 is 1. So that baboon only gets 1 calorie from that grasshopper. Now, this jaguar eats a baboon. It only gets 0.1 calorie. Okay, now you're starting to see why some of these animals, their whole life is just eating, because they have to survive, to pass on the biggest thing is passing on their genes. To do that, they have to live. And as we saw in the previous video, one of the things you need to live is food, water, shelter. Okay, so that's the 10% rule. Okay, super important. To go through it again, is the 10% rule is every time energy moves up a level, only 10% goes. Now you might be thinking, what's a level? That. The trophic pyramid. Okay, you've heard of food webs, you've heard of food chains. You probably haven't heard of the trophic pyramid or the energy pyramid, whatever it's called. Okay, so what we have here is, you can see we have a pyramid of different layers. We got soil, plants, herbivores, primary predators, secondary predators. Those terms, not too crazy important, but one of the things we want to look at right now is only 10% of the energy. So we have the plants here at the bottom, only 10% moves up to this level. and then 10% again, and then 10% again. So only 10% moves up every level. Okay, now we're going to go into some terminology or some vocab that you guys got to know. All right, so plants. There are two terms. There's actually multiple terms for plants, but the term we all know is they're producers. Now, the term you probably don't know is that these are called autotrophs. Okay, autotrophs. Now, we're looking at the trophic pyramid. Plants are called autotrophs. That word troph is coming up. Troph pretty much stands for energy. That's what you want. When you ever hear the word troph, T-R-O-P-H, you want to think energy. The word auto, A-U-T-O, means self. Okay, so an automobile, it's your own car. Okay, so an autotroph is something that makes its own energy. Auto, self, troph, energy. Okay, so producers are autotrophs. Now, what we have up here is we have all the things that eat, that need to get their energy from outside of their own body. They can't produce it. So these are called consumers. Now, of course, scientists always have to make things interesting, so consumer just isn't the most scientific word. What we're going to call them are heterotrophs. Heterotrophs. Once again, that troph word is coming energy. So hetero means other or outside. Okay, so they get their energy from outside their own body. Okay. Now, one of the things, I'm not going to go into this video, but other terms you're going to have to know is like what's a primary consumer versus secondary consumer. So we start to see that up here, secondary and primary. It's going up pretty much the higher the number, primary, secondary, tertiary, and even quaternary, so 4, just means the higher predator you are. But to save a little bit of time in this video, we're not going to go into all those little details with that. I want to make these videos a little bit shorter. Okay, so that's a trophic pyramid. Is seeing that 10% go through the food chain, food web, every time somebody eats. That's really important, okay? Because what we're going to look at now is how important is it if one of these things gets removed? Okay, it's only 10%, but it can have a huge issue. So let's scroll on down. So I have my food web of the savanna again. Okay, this one isn't 100% accurate, but it's the best one I could find. Now, what we want to look at here is I'm going to choose an animal to get rid of. Okay. I'm going to get rid of this snake. Okay, it's dead. Some disease wiped out all the snakes. Okay, so let's look at the things above it. So baboons eat the snakes. Well, there's no longer any snakes, so now a baboon is only going to be able to eat this grasshopper. What do you think is going to happen to the grasshopper population? It's going to go way down, because the baboons are just going to go crazy and eating it. Okay, so now the grasshopper population goes down. Well, this bird eats the grasshoppers. That population is going to go down. Okay, the skunk-looking creatures eat these birds. That population is going to go down. Okay, so now you're starting to see a change over here is already impacting the other side. Okay, so it's crazy what happens. Now let's look below it. So above it. Once again, baboon is probably, now that half its food source, the snake, is gone, the baboon population is probably going to go down as well, which means the jaguar population is going to have less things to eat, so that population is going to go down. But that's not the only thing. So what we see here, baboon population down, grasshopper population down. This grass now has one less predator. That population is going to skyrocket. So we're going to see a lot more grass. Okay, and so these things start to happen. Also, snake is gone. This cat-like creature, nothing eats it anymore. So this population is going to skyrocket at first. But then it's going to eat all the mice because its population goes crazy because there's no predator. So now the mice population is going to go down like crazy. Okay, so now you're starting to see removing one organism, one animal from the food web has massive consequences. This is why we spend so much time and energy and money, really the most important thing, honestly, trying to save these animals from going extinct. Okay, so it's huge. So now if we think back to the wolves of Yellowstone, The wolves of Yellowstone get reintroduced. We're reintroducing a top predator into the environment. What do you think is going to happen down that food web? It's going to have massive changes. Those are the biotic issues we're talking about. Now, when you have biotic changes, you're going to have abiotic changes. So you want to start thinking about that. You want to go down the food web and see what happens. Okay, so those are food chains and food webs. It got a little bit more intricate than you would think. So this is what happens, and this is why it's so important that we conserve and try to save these animals. Okay, so I hope you guys learned something. If you need any help with this stuff, just pause, rewind, go back. I knew I threw a lot at you pretty quickly. All right, so good luck. Let me know if there are any issues.